All right, let's go ahead and get started so we can get out of here on this beautiful Friday, Valentine's Day. I'm sure you all have big plans. For the record, today is February 14th, 2020. The time is 10:05, and we are here for a stakeholder meeting to talk about the consumer delivery app requirements and about our proposal for how to deal with marketing violation penalties, which we are just beginning to work on and get some input from y'all on. My name is Shana Horton. This is Marianne Morlock. Let's go ahead and start with Rule 35.7, Alcohol Delivery Compliance Software Applications. I hope you all had a chance to look at this revised version online. It is significantly revised from last time, if you were here, from version 1. We tried to address, as many of the comments and concerns that you had that we could, and still fulfill the requirements that the legislature charged us with to make sure that people who are purchasing alcohol using an app, a delivery app, are of age, are not intoxicated, are in an area that's wet for that product, and our need to be able to audit that. So with that, are there any comments or questions on 35.7? Come on up. I guess.
Good morning. My name is David Edmondson. I'm with TechNet. We are a trade association that represents the technology industry. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all about version 2 of 35.7. On subsection H, which requires the pre-submittal review of apps, we do have a lot of serious concerns about that. First off, I'd say that the last stakeholder meeting we had, I was in this exact spot asking that exact question and was told that it was not the agency's intention to require pre-review. This would be something that was only going to be done during an audit. TechNet's members are aware of no other state in the country or regulatory body that requires pre-review or pre-submittal of app content for any reason whatsoever. So this would truly be breaking new ground. Maintaining apps requires frequent technical fixes that are often rolled out quickly to protect the security of users. So informing the agency each time and requiring the agency to review each version will be burdensome on both the agency as well as companies. Forcing the companies to delay the release of an update by a minimum of 2 weeks or 10 business days would severely limit companies' abilities to respond quickly to known bugs and even cybersecurity threats, putting their users at risk. There's also some outstanding questions about how the agency will protect unreleased versions of apps in a very competitive marketplace. What security provisions are going to be in place? Will these be subject to open records requests? And then also the rules are unclear as to what the review will encompass, so we're unclear as to the actual purpose of advanced review as opposed to simply doing so during an audit. Not to belabor the point on subsection H, but subsection E1, we request striking that. This is the retention of name and birth date of the person accepting the delivery. That is sensitive, personally identifiable information that retail stores are not required to retain. So apps shouldn't be required to maintain that data either, if for no other reason than the security of their users. And then finally, subsection D, which requires the retention of a number of data points, including successful and unsuccessful login attempts. We're curious about the intended purpose of that subsection. These sorts of data retention requirements are going to be likely very difficult to comply with. So would want to work with the agency to see if we can try and reach the intended goal while not being overly burdensome on industry.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and clarify something with regard to one of your comments.
Yep.
No, you don't need to. On subsection H, that's not a pre-approval. You're not required to get some kind of letter back from us saying, great job, we approve of your app before you use it. Rather, we want an opportunity to see it before it rolls out. You can still claim safe harbor, you just have to meet all the requirements. You don't have to get pre-approval. So for example, if we never responded, you gave us our app and we hadn't responded and something came up, you needed to claim safe harbor under it. As long as you're meeting the requirements, you're still eligible. We just want an opportunity to have a review before it rolls out and get our eyes on it. And this function would actually not be in agency employees. It's something that we plan to contract out to someone with more expertise in that area. So that's just some clarifications on that. Thank you for your comments. Anyone else? Additional questions?
David Edmondson with TechNate, just to respond to the response. I would say that I am unaware and our members are unaware of any regulatory body or state agency that requires pre-review of an app prior to its release. Regardless of whether or not there's an approval process or you're looking for a thumbs up or the companies need a thumbs up prior to it's rolled out. I would say they're unaware of that existing anywhere else in the country as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Marcus Schwartz, Bracken Schwartz. No comments related to the rule itself, but more of the implementation of it from an enforcement perspective. And I don't know if you can speak to that, but is the idea of proving up this safe harbor going to be roughly equivalent to standard retailer sales? In other words,
Oh, you're getting way ahead of us here.
I know.
So we are going to have rules
Okay.
for safe harbor, and
Okay.
that will be coming very shortly. We're expecting a draft. We're in the early phases of talking about it, and should have something sort of drafted up within the next month.
Okay.
Month or two, and we'll be having a stakeholder meeting on that very soon. But we're hoping that those things, that those two rules will work together really
Gotcha.
well, and we'll be, using some of the aspects of the retail, of the seller server, that and the consumer delivery one as well. So.
Thank you.
Any comments, questions, or concerns about proposed Rule 35.7? We will be going through a little bit more revision on this. We have, like I said, we have a vendor that's going to be working with us on this particular rule, and so we need to make sure with that vendor that what we end up with is something that they can provide us the services to implement. So we still have we may have one more version of this to show you. So we appreciate your comments. Definitely, if you didn't want to stand up and say anything today, but you think of something later, please give me a call. We're still accepting comments and working on this rule. So again, this was a little bit different for us, so we really do appreciate your input. It's been extremely helpful, and we're hoping to get this in shape to where it works for y'all and it works for us too. So. That said, I guess we'll move on to the penalty policy. I hope you all got the handouts that were at the back. These were not posted ahead of time. They're just at the back of the room today. And I know you're just getting to look at them for the first time, and it's kind of a lot to absorb, but we'll just start out by saying that, the legislature asked us to take a look at adding marketing violations, cash credit violations to our matrix that we have for all of our public safety violations, or have something similar in our rules. And so to that end, we sort of brainstormed how we wanted to handle this, how we wanted to manage it. And we started out with this idea, and we're looking for your feedback and your impressions. We've got a long way to go on it, so this isn't by any means a final product. This is based, I started out my regulatory career at TCEQ. This is kind of based on what they do there. It's a simpler format, but essentially what we're proposing is that we use a penalty calculation worksheet, which this is sort of it's a draft that doesn't have any multipliers in it, so I'll explain that to you. But we'll just start with, essentially the point of this is to have our staff members writing down and being very transparent about what went into your proposed penalty for a marketing practices violation. It's not intended to change how we do things right now, except to make it more transparent and except to the extent that there are profits to be considered. The legislature also gave us the ability to consider profits. So let me just walk through this with you, if y'all don't mind. The idea here up at the top, you've got some identifying information. If there's a violation, our investigator goes out, fills in the permit, license number, complaint number, just identifiers. Then next there will be a choice. We're hoping maybe a drop-down menu or something like that for the violation type, the statute and rule, and then a description. Next, there will be a base penalty selection. This is what will go into the rule. So our idea is to divide up all of the different statutes and rules into, a smaller number, dollar amount base penalty, a medium base penalty amount, and then a larger base penalty amount based on the severity of the violation. And we're not sure what those numbers are yet. So this is still very much in draft form. So that's step one. Step two would be to count the number of violations. So for example, if you had a marketing violation at 5 stores, then that would be 5 violations. Or if it's something that went on for 3 months, maybe that would be 3 violations, 1 per month. Then you would multiply that. And again, I've got times A and times B. We're not sure what those multipliers would be. The first one might be a warning. I know how things are going right now. The subtotal there, and then the second step, this is what we do now, it's just kind of done in someone's head and not necessarily on paper, would be to consider mitigating and aggravating circumstances for ordinary or extraordinary. So ordinary mitigation, maybe you come into compliance within the amount of time that we've requested you to come into compliance. You're responsive and all of that. We multiply it by some, something that would reduce the penalty. Again, I don't know what that number is. Extraordinary, we'd reduce it by even more. Aggravating circumstance, for example, you're flagrantly doing something we told you not to do. You're doing it repeatedly. You have a history of continuing to do the same kind of violation. Things like that. Falsification, if you lie to us, we'd multiply that to increase the penalty at that point and come up with a subtotal there. The third step is that economic benefit, the profit that I was talking about. The legislature told us that essentially they want us to figure out a way that we can prevent these marketing violations from being something that people do as a matter, or in cash credit, as a matter of business practice, because it's cheaper for them to get a violation than to comply with the law. And so the idea here is to figure out a way to calculate, and again, we're open to all kinds of ideas on this, the profit that's made from an intentional violation, essentially. So costs avoided, costs delayed, additional profits, all of those economic benefits. And then take that into consideration. What the way to do that is to essentially add that to the penalty so that you're canceling out all that profit and then still having a penalty on top of it, which makes the penalty effective. And then we're proposing that to get the number of days of suspension in lieu, that we would come up with some kind of divisor so that the dollar amounts would be matched with a commensurate number of days. And that might need to be more than one divisor for different types of violations or different types of violators. We understand that. And that's it. So it's one page. It's not terribly complicated. And like I said, this is kind of the way that these violations, these penalties are calculated, in someone's head at this point. This puts it on paper. This would come to you as a violator. You would see this with your notice of violation. And it also does not limit you to this number. This is the opening bid, essentially. You can still settle on any number you want or any sort of settlement you want. So that's the basic gist of it. Like I said, we're still in the early phases. This would not apply to public safety violations. Those are still the dollar amounts that we have. we just want to get some feedback on what y'all think of this. Do you think it will work? We're right now kind of testing it out, seeing if it works for these types of violations, if we're coming up with similar range of penalties using this, and what some of those numbers ought to be. So I know this is brand new. We just gave it to you today, so you probably need some time to absorb it. But we're really hoping for a lot of feedback on this one. Does anyone have questions or comments, or do you want to add anything? Okay. Okay, I'll get it to you. Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll get it to them.
We'll post it.
We'll post these documents.
Somebody asked a question, that's why I'm saying.
I appreciate this, first of all. I think this is good and adds transparency. I think the devil's going to be in the details on all of this. I guess my first overall thought is, how are you going to figure profits? Are you going to look at past sales and then until the marketing practices violation occurred? And this is just marketing practicing, not cash law. I think this will, let me backstep one bit. I think for mom and pops this will be very easy. The larger chains and larger corporations, I think it's going to be a little more tricky. So one, how are you going to determine profits? Are you, like I said, are you going to look at, a 3-month section before the marketing violation and a 3-month section after and say, oh, there was an excess sales of blah, blah, blah. That's what your profit is? Or are you actually going to go into books and look at sales prices and, trucking costs, employment costs? I don't think you want to get into that granular detail, but just a thought. Another being, is the profit related just to that product? So for instance, permittee, that, let's just say a wholesaler, right? They have beer permits, they have ale permits, they might have spirits permits. Let's say it just relates to beer. Are you just going to look at the profit of the beer side? Or are you going to throw in spirits and ale as well? And then I guess when we merge beer and ale, then that'll be its own thing. Another one is, I assume you're going to look at a location basis. In other words, you aren't going to take the overall profits of the business. If this happens at, 2 locations, you're really just going to look at the profits from the 2 locations, so to speak, and not the overall business's profit from 2 months. And then the last one that immediately came to mind is parent companies versus permittees, how that's going to work in terms of you figuring out what the profit's going to be, because I think that gets tricky.
Those are all good questions and things we're thinking about. I think to a great extent, it's probably going to depend on, it could be case by case. And so what will end up happening is there will be a proposed penalty and a proposed economic benefit, and we'll say this is how we calculated it, and then there will be a discussion of, whether that's accurate or not with the violator. So, because like I said, this is really sort of a settlement opening bid.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll be able to, in any kind of rule or policy, necessarily think of everything. And obviously, if we do end up using this as we roll it out, we're going to learn a lot as we go along. So, but those are all questions that we've been thinking about too. It's not our intention. It's our intention to just recoup the money that a business has saved by violating, not more than that. So that's what we're trying to achieve. So we're really interested in your thoughts on that, on all of these issues that Marcus is bringing up.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to make comments right now, or?
I'll just briefly, Lance Lively with the Texas Package Stores Association. When I started 11 years ago, the delinquent list and credit law was a big topic. And as many of you know, we worked through how that schedule works. In my opinion, I look at the delinquent list every time it comes out. It's gotten smaller, obviously, and is the intent to, and there are a few repeat offenders on there frequently. And I know that there's 7 hits in a rolling 12-month period, et cetera. I mean, is the intent to try to get the delinquent list down to 0, which will never happen? That's an impossible goal. But I understand with repeat violators and going after those, you know, we're going to be very interested in what the details are on this moving forward.
And I can tell you that part of the Sunset Commission's recommendations was to take a look at cash credit, the way we deal with our cash credit violations, and try to eliminate the try to deal with the repeat violators, where it's sort of a part of their business, the way they do business. So we will be looking at that. That's not something that we've gotten really far down the road on, but that may be incorporated into this penalty policy.
Okay.
But and your thoughts on that are very welcome.
Appreciate it.
In addition to this penalty calculation worksheet, which is what you would get as a violator, we'll also have, if we do roll this out, the other part of this would be a written penalty policy. Like I said, the rule would essentially be the categories of base penalties, and then beyond that, we'd have a written and published and stakeholder vetted penalty policy that would be a narrative form of exactly what we're doing here. And so it would have a lot more detail than obviously just this worksheet. If you want to see an example of one, like I said, I started out TCQ, they do this there. They have that up on their website, so I'd encourage you to look at that. Ours won't be nearly as long. I think theirs is like 70 pages or something. Ours won't be as complicated, but it is a good thing to look at by analogy. And so that would go through similar to a rulemaking process, all the stakeholder and all the input and all the feedback, and then we would go back and look at that every so many years and update it and have another process open to stakeholders and input. So that's the idea, and then that would stay out of the rules so that it's more flexible to be changed and worked with, especially as we start out and we need to make adjustments. Come on up.
Kenneth Besserman with the Restaurant Association. Have you given much thought about the differentiation between a warning and an actual violation? Is there, in other words, is there always going to be a warning first, or will it depend on the severity of the infraction? So just, I don't know where you stand on that, if it's always going to be a warning first and then you go to
It's under
violation.
discussion.
Okay.
I think that people are used to having some warning, so we understand that. But that's something that we're talking about right now with as a matter of policy.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments right now about the penalty policy or the penalty calculation worksheet or any of that? So you'll be seeing this. This will be coming up again in stakeholder contexts. Like I said, we're in a little bit of a testing mode right now. We're kind of using this alongside what we currently do and seeing how it marries up with our current practices. Because like I said, we're not trying to increase penalties. We're trying to just create a transparent process. The only time you have an increased penalty is like when the legislature told us to, which is when there's that profit. So that's the idea, and I encourage you all to be in touch as we move forward with this. Could be kind of a cool thing if it works out. So. There's no other questions or comments, and I guess we'll go ahead and close the meeting. Thank you all so much for coming.